Hello and welcome to York Observatory's monthly TeleTube broadcast, the online astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. We're broadcasting live from the AICO Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. York YouTube broadcasts every last Friday of the month at 7:30 local Toronto time here on our YouTube channel, York U Observatory. For any questions or comments you have of our past shows, or if you have suggestions for future topics, please send us an email at observe@yorku.ca. You can always connect with us on Instagram with the handle at York Observatory and Facebook at Anna Coswell Ops. I would like to inform you about the opening and call for applications for the Summer 2024 Astronomer in Residence program. This program is a collaboration of the AICO Observatory with Killarney Provincial Park to host astronomers in the certified dark sky site of Killarney to lead in-person presentations and shows using the park's observatory. To learn more about the program, its requirements, and the application process, visit our website at yorku.ca/observatory/air. Good evening, everyone. I'm Camila, and I'm here with Noor, Dev, Boris, and Hector, and we're from the AICO Observatory at York University. Tonight, we are joined by a special guest from the National Observing Committee, Joe VandenDool, who will be talking about getting ready for stargazing. I would also like to mention that the observatory at York campus is in Toronto, and we would like to welcome you all to our show and to acknowledge the traditional land that our telescope is on. The observatory acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. Our stargazing and astronomical efforts join the long history and current practices of astronomy for this land. The observatory looks forward to continuing to learn and revitalizing our knowledge in this area.
Welcome, everyone. Before we get started with our main show, we want to give you a little update on what you can see this coming week. This week, we have the Summer Triangle, made up of the bright stars Vega, Deneb, and Atira visible overhead. In the east, after sunrise, the constellation Leo rises, marking the arrival of late summer skies. The moon is in its last quarter phase, and the following planets are visible: Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. Saturn can be in the southeastern sky just after midnight, shining brightly, best viewed before sunrise. Its stunning rings are a sight to behold, but it requires a small telescope to be appreciated fully. Wrapping up the month on June 30th, we have a stunning conjunction with Mars hovering halfway between the moon and Jupiter. This alignment creates a beautiful spectacle in the night sky, perfect for all stargazers. Mars rises later in the night, around 3 a.m. in the east. Its reddish color makes it relatively easy to spot with the naked eye, but of course a telescope will be useful to see some of the surface markings. Viewing tips for this week include finding a dark spot away from the city lights to get the best view of the stars and planets. The summer triangle stars are bright enough to be seen with the naked eye, but binoculars will enhance the view, revealing many more stars within each constellation. The best nights to observe the sky are those following the new moon on July 5th, as the darker the sky will allow for better visibility for fainter objects. Make sure to check the weather and aim for clear, cloudless nights for optimal stargazing. Whether you're using your eyes, binoculars, or a telescope, there's plenty to explore in the night sky this July. Enjoy your celestial event.
Hello, everyone. Today's special guest is Joe VandenDool. Joe is an experienced visual astronomer with 13 years in the field. He's a former president of the Mississauga chapter of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and a current member of the National Observing Committee. Joe continually seeks new celestial discoveries and will serve as an astronomer in residence at Killarney this August, further contributing to the astronomical community with his expertise and leadership. We are very happy to have you tonight on our show. Please take it away.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm gonna share this screen. Yeah. All right. So, like I said, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I had an opportunity to come out to the observatory at York on Wednesday night this week and met a few of you guys in person. So that was, I really appreciate that. And in my field, now I'll give a little presentation about myself here. In my field, I don't have the benefit of an observatory. So when I take my telescope out, I got to load it in my car, got to drive, a good distance, and like I said, a bit about myself. Yeah, I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and with that, I sit on a committee that helps ensure that people are getting out and stargazing and being recognized for doing so. So I bought my first telescope, like I said, 13 years ago. My current telescope is a 16-inch. And with that, in that 13 years, I have visually observed with my own eyes 64 galaxies, 77 open and globular clusters, 39 planetary and emission nebula, and 148 lunar features. And the reason I know that is because I went back through my logs. So I keep logs when I'm observing, and that helps to go back and remember what I have seen. In addition to that, I've observed all of those without the aid of computerized telescopes, without the aid of the telescope slewing to the object by itself. I am a star hopper, so I will find all of these targets by looking at the bright stars nearby and pointing my telescope accordingly. So before we get too thick into the weeds, I want to tell you a little story. It's the story of the neglected telescope. Once upon a time, there was a guy who thought he might like to try some stargazing. He bought himself an expensive telescope, took it out a few times, couldn't quite get the hang of it. It put it in the basement, and it sat there for the next 10 years unused and unloved. I didn't say it was a happy story. I didn't say it was a good story. Unfortunately, it's a true story, and it's happened to more than one person that I know of. And so the goal of tonight is to try to prevent that from happening. If you are thinking of buying a telescope in the next year, or if you know anybody who's thinking of buying a telescope in the next year, send them this YouTube and make sure they watch this so they know how to avoid some of the pitfalls, right? There's a lot of talks on what telescope should I buy. I didn't want to do that talk because that's been done to death. But I haven't seen a lot of talks about, well, now I bought my telescope, so now what? So that's what we're trying to do here tonight. I think the solution to the problem is planning. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing about stargazing, the first thing that we need to plan for is the weather. Nobody's going to see anything, no stars, no deep sky objects if the clouds are in, right? So obviously we can use Weather Network as sort of a rough guide, a lookout. But in the astronomy world, we have a couple of apps and that help us get a better idea of what the sky is really going to be like. So on my phone, and I'm an Android user, so I'm going to talk about some of the apps that I use. Now, know that I'm an Android user. Some of these apps are available on iPhone, but that said, there are other apps that do equivalent things on iPhone. The first app that I'll talk about is Astropheric. Now, what this is showing, we can choose where we want to get the forecast for. But the first thing is cloud cover, and the bluer the better, and the whiter, well, the white is bad news. But there's also an element called transparency. That's sort of the haze in the sky. And so it might not be cloudy, but if it's hazy, it's still not great to look through. you might not be able to see very much. The last thing on this in the blues here is what we call the seeing. Now, seeing is a little bit like how turbulent the water is. If you can think of, a pond, if the water is really perfectly still and clear, you can see through to the bottom reasonably smooth. But if it's turbulent, seeing through to the bottom, it gets a bit wobbly. Now, we're unfortunately stuck with an atmosphere over our head. Nothing we can do about that. We kind of need that. But if it's still, then we're going to get a better view. Now, that's going to make a bigger difference on a bigger telescope. Smaller telescopes can kind of cut through it a little bit better, right? So up to maybe 5 inches. So depending on that seeing, if it's not great seeing, I might choose to take my smaller telescope that night, right? So looking down a little bit further, we got a couple other things we need to worry about, right? How high is the moon? That's all that is. There's an International Space Station pass over at this time, so that might be an interesting highlight. The wind. The wind's a big one. I've been caught by this a couple of times, going out with the telescope thinking, oh yeah, it's perfectly clear. I get out there and it's windy as all get out. And so it's hard to keep the paper still. If you're trying to do astrophotography and the wind it's going to shake your telescope a little bit, it's not going to give you a clear picture. So we're going to make sure that the wind is reasonably low. And then here we've got our temperature and our dew point. The real easy way to know if it's going to be dewy is when these two lines get real close together, you got to prepare for some dew. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a sec. But so like I said, I use this app quite a bit, Astropheric. It's free and I am all about free software. Every piece of software on this I'm going to talk about tonight is a free software. Clear Outside is another free software. I don't use it as much, but point of note here is that Clear Outside is using a European model of the forecast to predict the forecast. Same idea, white is bad, blue is good, where Astropheric is running on a Canadian model of the forecast. So if they line up, then great. If they don't line up, well, you take your chances, right? So. The next thing, obviously, as Noor mentioned in the beginning there, location, right? I live down by the lake in Etobicoke. This is the view from not too far from my house, except it doesn't look quite right. There we go, that's better. Yeah, get rid of all those stars because that's more like what I actually see from my home. So obviously we need to drive a little ways, and thankfully NASA's made it kind of easy for us. They've got some satellite image of the night, the Earth at night, and so we can see. Oh, maybe there's a little pocket, or it's a little bit darker out here. Obviously, the further north we drive, it's going to get better. But you gotta remember if you either you plan to stay overnight or if you're going to drive home when you're tired in the middle of the night, you don't want to drive too far. So I don't want anybody to do anything dangerous. Make sure you're not going to fall asleep at the wheel. Unfortunately, I've caught myself a couple of times in a dangerous situation, but make sure you're safe. So I tend to follow the rule of let's stick to within an hour's drive. But you got to do you. Now, if we take this map and we just kind of make an intensity map of that, it looks like this. And so we can see we're going to call this the Bortle map. It's named after a guy named Bortle. And obviously the yellow is a bit better than the orange. The greens are better. The blues are better. Algonquin looks amazing, right? So if you're planning a camping trip up to Algonquin this summer, and I am, bring a telescope or bring whatever you want to do stargazing. We'll talk about that in a bit too. Killarney, yeah, as was mentioned, we'll be up in Killarney this summer as well. So I'm looking forward to that. So if we take that map and we can get an idea of of how much of the sky we can see at each of those intensities, right? So that this is it. It gives us a Bortle number. And typically when I go out, if I'm not going too far, I'm looking for something that's about a 4.5, maybe a 4. If I can get to a 3.5, I'm pushing it, but you know, that's much better. Obviously, you know, if we can get out to Algonquin or a 1 or a 2, then we're in our happy place. But yeah, so that's the Bortle scale. And of course, we have one more big source of light pollution, the moon. That's a picture that I took. I took it from actually the lake down in Etobicoke. So you don't need if you're doing lunar observing with your eyes, with telescope, with binoculars, you don't need to worry about going somewhere dark. That's the nice thing, and that's a that's a really great thing. There's a ton of features on the moon that we can observe, ton of craters, and they're all named. If you pull up a lunar map, you know, you can get the names of that. Now the moon, if I'm planning to do some dark sky observing, I use an app on my phone called the Moon Phase Calendar. There's others, but it gives me an idea of, you know, what brightness the moon is going to be this weekend, for example, whatever. So I know, oh yeah, it's not a good weekend. It's full moon, you know, or it's new moon. Let's go, right? And for all the planning that we do, you know, May 10th taught us that spontaneity matters, right? So you got to be ready to go when they say that there, you know, there's a geomagnetic storm that's going to cause the best auroras in 20 years. You just go. It doesn't matter if it's a Wednesday night and you got to work the next day. You take advantage of the opportunity that's been presented to you. And man, were we rewarded on that night. I was up north of Barrie that night, and that was, I think, one of the strongest emotional reactions I've had to being under a dark sky in that I can remember. So all right, what to bring? Hint, it's not all of this. So when I'm loading my car, when I'm preparing to go, obviously I'm going to throw my telescope in, right? Binoculars, camera. If you're doing astrophotography, you got your go-to mount, eyepieces. I'm gonna lump all that stuff in with this one. But there's a few other things I have a duffel bag that's got some tricks and stuff in it that I need every time I go, right? So my logbook and with my maps. I do use my phone a bit, but if I can use the paper maps, I'm not ruining my dark adaptation there. A pen, keep the pen in your bag, because the number of times I've been like, where in my dashboard, in my glove box, my cup holder, where's the pen? I can't find the pen, right? So keep a pen with your stuff. Red flashlight, again, dark adaptation, right? We talked about that. So we want to make sure that our eyes are adjusted to the dark and stay adjusted to the dark. And white light just ruins that, right? A chair. So if there's statistics that have shown that the people who come back to stargazing again and again, it's because they're comfortable. You got to have a chair to be comfortable, right? So there are fancy chairs you can get that you can use with your telescope. They're called observing chairs. They can tend to be a bit expensive. I don't use one of those. I just use basically a lawn chair. But you find what works for you, right? Warm clothes with deep pockets. So I dress for the next season. So in the summer, I dress for the fall. In the fall, I dress for the winter. If I go observing in the winter, I dress for a polar vortex. And I just recently got electric heated insoles that I'm excited to try for this winter. But deep pockets. I say deep pockets. I got eyepieces coming in and out of my pockets all the time. I switch an eyepiece. and it goes into my pocket. I got my pen in my pocket all the time. As I'm setting up my telescope, my telescope requires some screws to be, so I make sure I got deep pockets. So I wear sort of a blazer, but you find what works for you. Extra batteries. Oh man. So I was out once at a conservation area with some friends, and I had left the little red dot finder light on my telescope on, and of course the battery's dead, right? So anybody got a spare 2032 battery? And thankfully somebody did. And ever since that day, I keep spare, batteries for all my gear in my bag, right? So if I'm with my camera, I have an extra camera for a battery for my camera. Telescope, I got the extra red light batteries, that kind of stuff. A blanket, or if you're a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, a towel. I set up on a picnic blanket that I got from Costco. That way, if anything drops, it drops onto the blanket. You're not looking through the grass. You're not looking through the parking lot, whatever. It's got to be on that. And in the winter, it acts as an insulation barrier between you and the icy, snowy ground. So it does actually help keep your feet a bit warm. So I always have a blanket in my car. And occasionally the blanket ends up wrapped around me too. Hand warmers. I keep these ones in and it's not just for warming my hands. These are the disposable ones, the ones that are air activated. If you use a rubber band, you can wrap that around your eyepiece, and it acts as a really low tech dew heater for your eyepiece. So if you're not familiar with dew, basically as the components of your telescope reach the ambient temperature, and there's dew in the air, it will start to condense on your eyepiece and on your secondary mirror if you've got a Dobsonian on your primary, if you've got a refractor or a Cassegrain. And they sell electric heaters that will keep it above ambient temperature, keep the dew off. But if you don't happen to have one of those, you haven't made the investment yet, you can use these hand warmers for that. And so yeah. I always stop at Timmy's on my way to wherever I'm going and get myself a snack and a drink. It keeps your energy up for the duration of your adventure. Bug spray. Nobody likes to get eaten by the mosquitoes. That's pretty straightforward. I like to have music. Sometimes if I'm alone out in I'm not going to recommend that you go alone out to the middle of the woods or conservation area, but if you are, music can just help keep your mind from wandering into and keep you focused on the stargazing. And finally, zip ties. Throw them in your bag if you got one, and thank me later. But I was out just recently. As I was putting this together, this presentation, this one made the appearance. I was out at a conservation area with some friends, and somebody had a piece of gear that they were using with their astrophotography rig where the power wasn't staying on, and only if you held the power cable a certain way would the power stay on. And I grabbed a zip tie from my car. I just happened to have one from my car, and we hooked it up a certain way, and it held that cable just in place. And he was able to do his imaging that night. It would have wrecked his night had he not been able to do that. So from now on, those zip ties are staying in my bag. Now, you got everything packed up. You've got a location picked out. Conservation area somewhere. Maybe you're gonna meet some friends. Maybe there's some astronomers already there, right? So you pull into the parking lot. Bang! Ow! Okay, they were dark adapted, and you pulled in with your headlights. I don't want to talk about this, but we got to talk about this. When you pull into the parking lot of the conservation area, just turn the headlights off if you can. Not all cars can do it, I realize, but if you can turn your headlights off, people will appreciate it. The other thing is, it's not the time to have a campfire. I've heard stories. I've been at conservation areas where people decided, it's time to have a campfire, and they just, you can see, look at how much they illuminate the trees behind, right? They just throw photons, right? So, that's more light pollution. And I'll date myself a little bit with this one. For those of you who know The Simpsons and know what's about to happen in this, when Bart's about to give that telescope a big old slap. So if there's people there with gear, by all means, the first thing I do is I go and talk to them, but I don't touch their stuff unless they invite me to touch their stuff, right? So keep your hands to yourself unless you're invited to. And finally, the last thing, it's not the time for drinking. Booze, it impairs your vision for one. Just it's leave the booze at home if you're going to go out with a telescope, or going out to meet some friends for stargazing. It's or save it for afterwards or whatever. It's not the right time. All right, we can move on. So, I thought, okay, let's start without a telescope. What can we plan to see without a telescope? Well, there's constellations, and this is a really great way to learn the sky, right? So learn what's where in the sky, where things are, how and there's all sorts of wonderful historical stories that go with with these constellations, right? The mythology of all of them. It can be a really rewarding experience to just sort of have your app that has the mythology, and I use Sky Safari for that. But as you're looking through the constellations and learning them and learning the mythology of the stories of them, that can just make a really great night with your family, whatever. So one of the tools that I started out using when I was 13 years ago was a planisphere like this. So the constellations that appear in the sky from month to month are obviously different. So if you don't have one of these, pick one up. But yeah, you can also use the software on your phone. But these, again, keep your night vision, right? So you don't need to have the light from your phone interfering with your dark adaptation, right? Another thing we can see is meteor showers, right? So we got meteor showers coming up in August, and so and try out some photography with that, right? You just need a camera on a tripod to do some of that stuff, right? Intervalometer. You can get intervalometers for your phone too, so you can try some of that stuff. May 10th, right? So we had that amazing nebula aurora, sorry, and didn't need any telescope gear at all for that. That was amazing. So and back in April we had our solar eclipse, which I was out in Leamington for that. But yeah, so that's the thing with the solar eclipse, is you had to be in the right place to be able to see that solar eclipse. It wasn't totality from Toronto where we were, so we had to drive. If you missed that one, there isn't one coming up again in 2 years. You're going to have to buy a plane ticket to go and see it in Spain. I know some people who have already bought that plane ticket because for them that solar eclipse was their super emotional thing, and they're like, we need to do this again, and they've planned to buy their plane ticket. All right, let's move on to binoculars. So if we have just a set of binoculars, we can start to do some lunar observations, some lunar identifying the features on the moon, all these Maria. That's the dark parts. They all have names. The craters, and then if you have a telescope, you start to see details in the surface of the craters and in the bed of the crater. These sort of splits. They call them riles, and you start to see the mountain ranges. I believe this is a mountain range right here. So you can start. There's a lot of great things you can see with with either a really basic telescope or binoculars on the moon. So I really encourage people to start there. Again, you don't have to drive anywhere. You can do this one from your backyard, right? So that's an added bonus. Comets, right? So in the last month, we've had a comet passing through our sky. It's just gone around the back of the sun now. And so that comet was called Ober's. And this weekend, it's supposed to be in a really good place to be viewed. Just sort of in the northwest, sort of just below the Big Dipper, around maybe 11 o'clock at night. And there's a lot of beautiful pictures on the internet of different comets. I like this one because it was representative of the last comet that I viewed through a telescope, which was Neowise a couple of years back. But you can really start to see that tail. I highly encourage everybody. I'm going to try on Sunday night out, where I am, to go and see that one. And here's the path it's taken over the last month. So we'll be looking just in the area of Lynx here. So with every comet, you can generally find a map on the internet of where the comet will be on what night. So that's what this is, and this one would pertain to Solaris, but it's also available on Sky Safari or whatever astronomy app that you want to use, right? And we can start to see some of the deep sky objects. So this is the Pleiades, and the Pleiades in my telescope, I can't fit the whole thing in. My telescope, the field of view is too small, right? So through binoculars, there's some great deep sky objects that take up a good portion of the sky that binoculars are more well suited for. So if you're if you've got a telescope, throw a pair of binoculars into your bag, right? Because it'll help you do the star hopping. I've done that before too, right? So and this is a website. I just want to throw a shout out to this website. If you are looking at getting binoculars, if you have a pair of binoculars, you want to take them out this summer, check out this website. It gives you really good tips on what to expect to see with your binoculars on different targets. It gives you some targets to look for, that kind of stuff. Okay. Moving on to the planets. Planets, obviously, we can see them. Some of them we can see naked eye, right, out to Jupiter. But if we want Neptune or Uranus, you need a telescope for that. And sorry, out to Saturn. Now, there are times when viewing the planets is better. Right now, you got to get up super early in the morning or stay up really late at night, neither of which is my pleasure. So I'll wait until the fall when the planets are visible more in the evening. But just to kind of give you an idea here, if you're not familiar with it, this image here is showing Jupiter at opposition. So opposition to the sun. It's on the other side of the Earth from the sun. And when our outer planets are at opposition, that is the ideal time to view the outer planets. And if you can get that information, it'll give you some ideas to plan when to plan to see them, or when to try to photograph them, because they are also at their time when they're closest to the Earth, when they're at opposition. And so they'll be better to photograph as a result. With the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, the ideal time to see them is when they're sort of at a 45-degree from the sun, from us, or maybe a 90-degree, somewhere in between there. But it's a point called the greatest elongation. So greatest elongation is the best time to view either Mercury or Venus. And we can see some different details accordingly. Venus, you get the it'll either look like a crescent, like a crescent moon, or it'll go to a sort of a gibbous shape, like the gibbous moon. Yeah. Along with that, with Jupiter through a telescope, we can see the shadow of the moons on the surface of Jupiter. And that's a really cool thing. I remember a few years back, there was a really rare time when there was 3 shadows of the moon visible on the surface of Jupiter at once. And so we made a special effort to go out and observe that. And again, we didn't have to go to a dark sky really for that. The planets are visible from the city through even modest telescopes. But to see the shadow like this, you're going to want at least 6 inches, preferably higher in terms of telescope size. But yeah. And so with the shadow of the moons on Jupiter, we can also see the shadow of, or in this case, the occultation of the planets, the inner planets on the sun, right? So in 2012, we had the transit of Venus. Most of us aren't going to be alive to see the next one of that. That's in about 100 years. But coming up in 2032, we'll be able to see the transit of Mercury across the face of the sun. Now, unfortunately, you're going to need a plane ticket for that to go out to Africa or any of these places. But yeah, so again, we're planning, right? So let's start some financial saving for that now, and by 2032, we'll be ready to buy that plane ticket. Okay. Deep sky. Now, this is my passion. This is where I spend most of my effort, right? So my goal when I go out with my telescope is to see something I've never seen before. Every time I take my telescope out. And usually if I can get on average, I'll get maybe 3 new things that I've never seen before. I'll go back and visit some of the old favorites as well. And especially if I've got friends with me, I'll show them some of the brighter objects. But I really enjoy seeing something new, right? So with the deep sky, this is the Sky Safari app that I've mentioned. There is a free version of it. The paid version, there's a $4 version-ish that's I think significantly better. But do what works for you, right? So and if you go into the what can we see tonight, we can pull up tonight's best, and it will pull up a list of what deep sky objects can we view, and double stars can we view tonight, and are prominent. Now with this, you're going to get a lot of repetition. It's the objects aren't necessarily going to be optimally placed. So I don't tend to use this feature too much, but what I do use is I observe using a logbook and a list. And so I will check things off of the list as I view them. And so I know, oh yes, I've seen that one, but I've not seen that one. Now I use a list from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, but there are also lists. There's things like the Herschel 400, and other clubs have different lists. Even just the Messier list, right? A common list to use. This is an actual page from my actual logbook. So the list that I use comes with a map, and I will actually check off the items that I have seen. So I might go out on a night and I see, oh, Perseus is up. I have not seen this object. I'll give it a try tonight, and I'll see, and then I'll check that one off, and I know that I've got that, right? So That's the last page of my logbook that I'll share with you. This is now we get into some complicated areas, especially the cluster of galaxies in the Virgo cluster, which is there's many galaxies there, and you can kind of get tripped up. So in this case, it's saying go to the next page, and okay, it's slightly better, but star hopping this mess is not easy. It can be a bit challenging. And so what I ended up actually doing was I found an image on the internet that had inverted the colors of and is like a wide field image of the area. So then I knew, oh, okay, I can see visually in advance of seeing it through my telescope what I should expect to see in terms of the neighboring stars and that kind of stuff. And that can be real key. You know, there's a piece of software on my phone I used to have. Unfortunately, it's kind of outdated now. So you got to use an older phone, but it's called FO Viewer, and it would allow you to download images and predict what it's going to look like in your eyepiece. So you set up your telescope, you set up your eyepiece, and it's going to give you a certain zoom factor. And then planetary nebulas, for example, they might be so small in your wide field eyepiece that it looks like a star, right? So then you're going to know, okay, I'm going to have to use a wider field to be able to pick this thing out. But it's getting a view ahead of time of what you might expect to see through the telescope can really save you some trouble in the long run. Now, as I mentioned, I average about 3 objects a night, and I will routinely, I'll get my gear set up, and then I open my logbook and I say, okay, well, what can I see tonight? And I start doing my planning there, which is not great. There is a better way to do it, and this software kind of addresses that. Now, what that does help you with is that, let's say there's a cloud over in Cassiopeia. Well, you can start to focus more on another part of the sky. You kind of have to adapt, right? If it's cloudy over there but it's clear over there, or there's light pollution dome. In a lot of the places that we go north, you get the light of the GTA to the south. So we're looking more north. Or if we go down to the lake in Lake Erie, we can look south, and we can avoid some of the northern lights, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so getting to this program, this is a program called K-Stars, and it's a desktop application, so it doesn't work on your phone. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to add a list of objects that you want to view to your wish list. So I, for example, just loaded in all of the Messier objects. And then what you can do is you can click on the this column here, and it will sort them by right ascension. The right ascension is where it's located, is one of the factors of where it's located in the sky. But when you sort by that, you're actually sorting by what season are they at the highest in the sky. And so as you sort of scroll down, you'll see the time. So if we got M53, for example, here, I know that at the beginning of the night, and this is my local time down here, this is universal time, but at the beginning of the night is when it's going to be at the highest in the sky, right? So I can plan, and I can add a bunch of things to the session plan. And then if you watch, I'm going to click this in a second, I'll do a little animation, but as we scroll down this list, that bar is going to go across the screen, the night. So we know as we get later into the night, if you want to really plan to stay up all night, it'll sort the objects for you and give you an ideal time of when it's highest in the sky. And that matters for Dobsonian orders. For people who own a Dobsonian telescope, you know that if the object is really low, Well, you're kind of either bending over your telescope or sitting on the ground. If you're using a Cassegrain, that's less of an issue. But for the Dobsonians, when it's higher in the sky, it's more comfortable to view because you can basically do it standing up. So this is a really great program because it also, again, gives you, you can download the images from Sinbad or replace them from the internet, and it gives you an idea of what it's going to look like. So M27, obviously the Dumbbell Nebula, right? So you get an idea of what it's going to look like. This program will also, again, do the telescope eyepiece simulation. So you can, if you when you execute the session plan, you can do the mirror flip because Dobsonians, they view backwards, so you can get an idea of what it's going to look like in your actual eyepiece in your actual telescope. So okay, so then I started to wonder, well, maybe AI might be able to help us here, right? So I said, hey ChatGPT, what's the easiest order in which to observe all of the Messier galaxies in the Virgo cluster, right? So that was going back 2 slides, right? We looked at the Messier galaxies in the Virgo cluster. Let's say I'm working on a Messier list, right? And so it kind of comes up with an order that it thinks start at M87. It's the biggest and the brightest, and go from there, go to 84 and 86, and then go to 88, go to 90. So actually that's pretty accurate, right? So that's one example of what you might be able to come up with, right? I said, I want to look through my telescope tonight. Give me some targets. I don't want to see the Messier objects. I've seen those already. I want to see something new. This is the date. This is I have a Dobsonian, so I don't want to look at anything lower than 30 degrees altitude because then I don't want to sit on the ground. My eyepiece gives me about 100 times magnification, and it kind of gave me a list of things to look at, and then I looked at the list and I realized that some of these aren't great telescope objects. Some of them are Messier objects in disguise with the NGC number. Some of them are below the horizon. 3.5 ChatGPT didn't quite get that one for me, but I do have access to ChatGPT 4, and it was able to give me a better list of things to view. So there is a difference between 3.5 and 4, and this one showed it. This one was able to cut through it. So I wanted to know what can I do to make backyard astronomy under a full moon more rewarding. Often, most of the time, if it's a full moon, I don't even bother to take my telescope out. A lot of people don't, and because you got so much light pollution you're dealing with that full moon. So it said, focus on the big bright things. Just do lunar observations. Look at planetary nebula, double stars. And so, okay, I think I've got the week that I'm in Killarney, it happens to be full moon that week. So I'm going to give some of this a try, right? So that's hopefully that works through. That works out. And then I started to wonder, what do the professional observatories do that maybe we can learn from as sort of the amateur astronomers that are just taking our own personal telescope out? So the first thing they do is they've obviously got their scientific priorities, right? Well, if I think about it, actually, I do have priorities. If I want to view the Virgo cluster of galaxies for my observing list, I know that I need to do that in May or April, because that's when they're the highest in the sky. If I wait until September, I'm not going to see them, right? So they have their observing constraints. We have our observing constraints. It's cloudy over there, I'll focus somewhere else. But also, recognize the limiting magnitude of your telescope. How faint can you actually see? How small can you actually see with your telescope? And if you know that, you're gonna have a better time. They use scheduling software. Well, we just talked about K-stars, and that was a great thing. They have optimization algorithms. Well, we just kind of went through that as well. And they've got real-time adaptation. So that's again, it's cloudy over here. So we're gonna have to focus over there, or there's something going on. We can't, pull into a parking lot and it's trees to the south. I mean, we can kind of plan for that. We got Google Street View. We can see, to some extent what we're gonna see when we get to our destination. But if there's trees, blocking out a part of the sky, we got to change where we're looking, right? Now they do one more thing, and that's communicate with other observatories. Well, that's the one thing I haven't really talked about too much. I did mention that I'm a member of the Astronomical Society of Canada, and I know a lot of you guys are a member of the York University Astronomy Club. Talk to each other. I learn about comets. I learn about astronomical events from emails that I get from my colleagues in the club. I'm also a member on a WhatsApp group of people who are avid telescope users, and so they'll post images, and you really get an idea of, oh, this is happening, oh, that's happening, right? So and being a member of that WhatsApp group, that encourages me to go out more frequently. I knew pretty soon when I bought my telescope that the first thing I needed to do was find people to do it with, because for me, the social element of it is what kept me coming back to going observing, right? So if you have a friend that you will go observing with, if you're a part of a group that meets up at different places, whatever, you're more likely to take your telescope out than if it's just you on your own. Or at least that was the truth for me. And so I highly recommend joining either a club near yourself, getting on a WhatsApp group, whatever it is. Find other astronomers, Facebook groups, whatever. And before I sort of end, I just wanted to give a last bit of inspiration for you to get your telescope out this summer, something to think about while you're out there. And I'll just give this a read. Under the velvet canvas of the night sky, the stars emerge like scattered diamonds, each twinkling with tales of ancient light. As we gaze upward, time itself seems to stretch and yawn, revealing the boundless tapestry of the cosmos. Constellations whisper myths of gods and heroes, while the distant glow of galaxies beckons us to ponder our place in the universe. In the quiet moments beneath the stars, we find a profound connection to the infinite, a serene reminder of the beauty and mystery that lie beyond our earthly realm. The night sky, vast and unfathomable, invites us to dream, to wonder, and to explore the eternal dance of light and darkness. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Joe, for coming on tonight and telling us all about stargazing. We have 3 questions for you. I'll start with mine. First of all, what celestial events should stargazers look forward to this year?
Yeah, we've had an amazing year for stargazing, or for backyard astronomy, or in Canada so far. We had that May 10th, aurora. We've had the total solar eclipse. That was my daughter's first. She's 6 years old. That was her first solar eclipse, and so we made that a family event. But so I feel like we've had some amazing things happen, but as the sun right now is still coming into that solar maximum, that 12-year cycle, and so aurora events are still possible to happen, and I can't give you dates for those. Obviously, they're based on when explosions on the sun happen. Nobody knows, but you keep your eyes peeled in the media. we've also got the Perseid meteor shower coming up in August, right? It peaks on the 12th of the night of the 13th. So, get out in August. I think you won't have to contend with the moon too much, because I think that's first quarter moon, and so it'll sort of set, and then the peak of the meteor shower will again be after midnight. That's typical. With the planets right now, again, we said they're morning objects, but as we come into the fall, towards Saturn is at opposition in September, Jupiter is in opposition in December, and so you've got those dates to optimally see when they're the biggest in the sky. If you want to buy a plane ticket and you're free to go in October, go south to South America. They got an annular solar eclipse happening. If you don't want to fly out there, I realize next year, but there's a total lunar eclipse coming in March of 2025 as well. So, there's a bunch of stuff. I will recommend, if you join the Astronomical Society of Canada, they send you the observer's handbook every year, and it has a month-to-month view of what you can see. The other thing I know, so fairly frequently, I think in July, we'll be able to see a double transit shadow on Jupiter. I think that's towards the end of the month, but there's you got to keep your eyes peeled, right? So that comet is Comet Ober's. That's this weekend. That it's really ideal. So if there's a clear sky this weekend, look to the northwest. For sure, you might need some binoculars for that one, but get out there.
Hey, interesting information. Thank you so much, Joe. Now, moving on to the second one, let me ask you, what tools or apps can be useful for beginners for tracking celestial objects?
Yeah, so I obviously I mentioned a bunch of apps in my presentation, but Sky Safari is one that I would recommend to start with on your phone. You get the free version if you want to just check it out. It's great, but there's others as well. If you're on a desktop, Stellarium is great for desktop as well. Also a free application. And that one's available on every operating system as well. So yeah, so that one's called Stellarium.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
Hi, Joe and Boris. I had a couple of questions as well. First, I wanted to ask you, are there any local regulations or guidelines that you think people should be aware of when they go stargazing?
Yes, there are a couple that come to mind. The first is that a lot of the parks, they will close at either dusk or 11. They'll put up a gate, so you can't drive into the park. So we started having issues with that at the beginning of COVID, and we had to sort of switch up our destinations a little bit as a result. Now, so be aware that you might encounter the park being technically closed, and I'm not going to tell anybody to break the rules here, but in my experience, I have had both instances where the police just doing their normal rounds will either show up. In one case, they asked us to leave because they informed us that there was coyotes in the area, that we were kind of not safe from that situation. In other instances, they go, "Oh, these guys are just stargazers. They're just nerds. They're not causing any harm," and they just drive right past and they don't say anything. So that's one. Now there is another big one. And that is these objects right here. This is a green laser pointer. Now, they're really great for pointing at the stars, but the Ministry of Transportation has banned them anywhere within a certain distance of an airport. And you can use them. There's a map. If you look on the Ministry of Transportation's website, there's a map of where they are allowed to be used and where they're not allowed to be used, and that's every little tiny municipal airport, that within the country, that they're not allowed to be used. And then when you're in an area outside of that, they really want you to have somebody watching for planes, because as soon as there's a plane in the sky, it really messes with them. It can really throw them off. We've had issues with people pointing green laser pointers at planes. It makes them blind. They can't see. It's a big problem. So either just don't use green laser pointers, or be aware that there are strong regulations on that, and they will fine you for using those. So where you're not allowed to be using them. So be aware. Yes.
All right, thank you. And our final question for today is, what safety considerations do you think people should make when they plan out a stargazing trip?
And again, we want people to be safe, right? So if you're not comfortable going somewhere alone, don't. I take for granted that I am a white male, 6 feet tall, and that carries with it a certain amount of confidence. So if you want to go with a partner, and I still prefer to meet people, even though I have observed on my own from conservation areas. I still prefer to be with other people, just for the sake of maybe there's coyotes in the woods or whatever. Like, there's safety in numbers. So be safe. And again, like I mentioned, driving home at 3 o'clock in the morning, you got an hour and a half to drive, you're tired out. Don't fall asleep at the wheel. Don't make that mistake. It's not. Make sure if you need to sleep, just pull over, have a rest, and then carry on. But it's not worth the risk to fall asleep at the wheel.
Thank you very much for answering all your questions tonight. Well, everyone, you have been listening to the AICO Observatory's monthly TeleTube broadcast, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. The hosts this evening have been Noor, Deb, Hector, Boris, and myself, Cam. Make sure to leave any comments or questions in the comment section of the video and talk to us in the chat right now. All of our programs are free, but if you'd like to make a donation, see our website at york.ca/science/observatory. You can always connect with us on Instagram with the handle @YorkObservatory, and check out our website for show notes, content updates, and contact info at yorku.ca/science/observatory. Thanks for tuning in, clear skies, and have a good night.